Picture a dark dungeon in medieval Spain, where a prisoner trembles as a sinister iron claw, the Spanish Tickler, glints in the torchlight, ready to tear flesh from bone in a brutal dance of torture. Chapter 1. The Dawn of Medieval Torture. Imagine stepping into the grim underbelly of medieval Europe, where justice was often a spectacle of pain and fear. It's the 14th century, and across Spain, France, and beyond, dungeons echo with the cries of the accused. The Spanish Tickler, a vicious iron tool with claw-like prongs, emerges as a chilling symbol of this era's cruelty.
Ow.
Horror. We need to dive into the world that birthed at a time when torture wasn't just punishment, but a public performance meant to terrify and control. In this first chapter, we'll explore the medieval mindset, the rise of torture as a tool of power, and how devices like the Spanish Tickler came to be. Let's step back into a time when mercy was scarce and suffering was an art form. The Middle Ages, roughly spanning the 5th to 15th centuries, were a brutal time to be alive, especially if you crossed the wrong people. Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms, city-states, and feudal lords, each wielding power over life and death. The Catholic Church held immense sway, and the Spanish Inquisition, which would later perfect tools like the Tickler, was beginning to take shape. Crime, heresy, or even a whispered accusation could land you in a dank cell, facing interrogators who saw pain as a path to truth. Torture wasn't just about punishment. It was a way to extract confessions, deter rebellion, and show everyone who was in charge. Picture a village square. A crowd gathers not for a festival, but to watch a thief or heretic suffer, their screams reinforcing the message, "Bay or pay." This was the stage where the Spanish Tickler would later shine. But first, let's understand the world that made such a tool possible. In medieval Europe, justice was a mix of divine will and human vengeance. Courts were often run by local lords or church officials, and trials could be more theater than fairness. If you were accused of witchcraft, theft, or defying the church, evidence was secondary, confession was king. Torturers believed pain could force the truth, a belief rooted in the era's obsession with purging sin. Devices were crude but effective. Thumbscrews crushed fingers, racks stretched bodies, and branding irons seared flesh. The Spanish Tickler, though, was uniquely vicious. Imagine a metal glove or rake, its sharp prongs designed to rip skin with agonizing precision. Used mainly in Spain during the late medieval period, it was wielded by hand, allowing torturers to target specific areas, arms, legs, or worse, prolonging suffering without always killing. Historical records, like those from the Spanish Inquisition's early days, describe it as a favorite for breaking the defiant, leaving victims scarred and submissive. Why such cruelty? Medieval society was hierarchical, and fear kept it in place. Peasants toiled, nobles ruled, and the church dictated morality. Dissent, whether a peasant stealing bread or a scholar questioning doctrine, threatened this order. Torture devices like the Tickler were tools of control, used in dungeons or public squares to send a message. In Spain, where the Reconquista fueled religious zeal, the church and crown worked hand in hand. By the 1300s, as Christian kingdoms pushed back Muslim territories, accusations of heresy spiked, and tools like the Tickler found their moment. A 1375 Spanish chronicle mentions a heretic torn by iron claws until he confessed, likely a reference to an early Tickler. The device's design was simple, iron prongs attached to a handle or glove, but its effect was devastating. Shredding flesh while keeping the victim alive for further questioning. Let's paint a scene. A stone-walled dungeon in Toledo, lit by flickering torches. A prisoner, chained to a chair, faces a grim-faced inquisitor. The Tickler, its prongs gleaming, rests on a table nearby. The accused, perhaps a merchant accused of aiding enemies, knows what's coming. The torturer, often a hired man with no personal grudge, lifts the device, its claws catching the light. Slow drag across the arm, tears skin, blood dripping onto the straw-covered floor. The prisoner screams, but the inquisitor only asks, "Will you confess?" This wasn't random. Cruelty, it was calculated, meant to break the spirit. Unlike the rack, which dislocated joints, or the wheel, which crushed bones, the tickler's damage was surface level but excruciating, leaving scars that told a story of submission. The Spanish tickler's origins are murky, but it likely evolved from earlier tools like the cat's paw, a similar claw-like device used in France. By the late 1300s, Spain's growing power and religious fervor made it a hub for such innovations. Blacksmiths skilled in crafting armor turned their talents to torture, forging tools that were both functional and terrifying. The tickler's versatility, handheld, precise, reusable, made it ideal for inquisitors who needed confessions without killing. A 1390 record from Seville describes a claw of iron used on a suspected witch, who confessed after one session. The device's psychological impact was as brutal as its physical toll. The sight alone could loosen tongues. This era's obsession with pain wasn't just about justice, it was spectacle. Public torture drew crowds from nobles to peasants, all eager to see order enforced. The tickler, though often used in private dungeons, sometimes appeared in public, its marks visible on victims paraded through towns. This reinforced the church's and crown's power, showing what awaited those who strayed. But not everyone approved. Some clergy, like the 14th century scholar Juan de Mariana, criticized excessive cruelty, arguing it tainted justice. Yet such voices were rare, drowned out by a culture that saw suffering as divine. As we wrap up this glimpse into medieval torture's dawn, the Spanish tickler stands out as a chilling preview of what's to come. Its prongs were just one part of a broader system of fear, rooted in a world where power demanded pain. But how did this tool become a staple of the Spanish Inquisition? That's where we're headed next. In Chapter 2, we'll dive into the Inquisition's rise and how the tickler became its cruel companion. Chapter 2. The Rise of the Spanish Inquisition. Step into the heart of 15th century Spain. Where the air is thick with incense and suspicion, the Spanish Inquisition is taking root, a powerful machine of faith and fear that will shape the nation. For centuries, the Spanish tickler, with its cruel iron claws, finds its true calling in this era. It's becoming a tool of choice for inquisitors eager to root out heresy. This chapter dives into the origins of the Inquisition, the religious and political forces that fueled its rise, and how the tickler became a terrifying symbol of its authority. Picture a world where a single whispered doubt could lead to a dungeon's darkness, and let's explore how this institution turned pain into a path to salvation. Spain, in the late 1400s, was a land of transformation. The marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile united two powerful kingdoms, creating a Catholic stronghold. Their dream was a unified Spain, free of religious dissent. The Reconquista, the centuries-long campaign to reclaim Iberian lands from Muslim rule, was nearing its end, with Granada falling in 1492. But victory brought new challenges. Jews, Muslims, and converts, known as conversos, were suspected of secretly practicing their old faiths. The Church, backed by the Crown, saw heresy as a threat to both spiritual and political order. In 1478, Pope Sixtus IV authorized the Spanish Inquisition to investigate and punish these supposed betrayals. Unlike earlier church tribunals, this was a state-run operation, with royal approval, giving it unmatched power. Inquisitors, often Dominican friars, were tasked with ensuring religious purity, and they wielded tools like the Spanish tickler to extract confessions from those who wavered. The Inquisition's methods were methodical, almost bureaucratic. Accusations could come from neighbors, rivals, or even anonymous tips, often fueled by jealousy or vendetta. Once accused, you were arrested, often at night, and taken to a fortified tribunal. Think of the grim Alhambra in Granada, repurposed as a prison. Trials were secret, and the accused rarely knew their accusers or the charges in detail. The goal wasn't just punishment, but conversion. Confession could save your soul, even if it cost your body. The Spanish tickler fit perfectly into this system. Its handheld design allowed inquisitors to apply precise, excruciating pain, tearing flesh in controlled strips to prolong suffering. A 1483 record from Saragossa describes a converso merchant, accused of Judaizing enduring the iron claw, until he admitted to lighting Sabbath candles. The tickler's wounds, while agonizing, were rarely fatal, making it ideal for repeated sessions to break the spirit. Imagine a tribunal chamber, stone walls, a wooden cross looming, and a table lined with tools. The accused, perhaps a seamstress suspected of Islamic prayers, sits chained, trembling as the inquisitor reads charges. The tickler, its prongs sharpened to a razor's edge, is held aloft, its glint a promise of pain. The torturer, trained to read reactions, drags it slowly across her shoulder, blood welling as she gasps. Confess, and the pain stops, the inquisitor says, his voice cold but calm. The device's design allowed such precision in, like the rack, which could kill too quickly, or burning, which was final. The tickler's marks were a visible warning, often left on display when victims were paraded before execution or penance. This wasn't just about truth, it was about power, showing communities what awaited those who strayed. The Inquisition's reach grew fast. By the 1480s, tribunals sprouted across Spain, Seville, Toledo, Barcelona, each with its own dungeon and arsenal. The Spanish tickler, though not named in every record, appears in accounts as the garra or claw, its use noted in cases of stubborn heretics. A 1487 document from Valencia details a Morisco, a Muslim convert to Christianity, subjected to the claw for denying Christ's divinity. The torturer's skill was key. Practiced hand could shred skin without hitting arteries, keeping the victim alive for days of questioning. The device's portability meant it could be used anywhere, from grand tribunals to makeshift cells in rural outposts. Its psychological terror was unmatched. Survivors spoke of the dread of seeing it raised, knowing each pass would carve deeper. The Church justified this cruelty as a divine mission. Inquisitors believed they were saving souls even as they broke bodies. The Spanish tickler, simple yet brutal, embodied this paradox's pain, was a path to repentance, yet it wasn't used on everyone. Nobles and clergy often escaped physical torture, protected by status, while commoners, especially converts, bore the brunt. Women, accused of witchcraft or secret rituals, faced the tickler frequently. A 1490 trial in Cordoba describes a midwife whose arms were raked until she confessed to casting spells. The device's versatility made it a favorite, but its use was carefully recorded as the Inquisition prided itself on legalism. Scribes noted each session detailing wounds and confessions, creating a chilling archive of suffering. The tickler's prominence reflected Spain's broader climate of fear. The expulsion of Jews in 1492 and Muslims in the early 1500s intensified. Scrutiny and the Inquisition's tribunals became a machine of surveillance. Neighbors spied on neighbors, and the tickler waited for those who faltered. Yet some resisted. A rare account from 1495 tells of a converso tailor who endured 3 sessions with the claw, refusing to confess until he fainted from blood loss. Such defiance was rare, as the tickler's pain was designed to overwhelm. Its marked, jagged, bloody scars became a badge of shame. It's visible when victims were forced to wear penitent robes in public. Autos.f, the Inquisition's ritual. Spectacles. As we close this chapter on the Inquisition's rise, the Spanish tickler emerges as more than a tool, a symbol of an era where faith justified fear. Its claws tore through flesh in defiance, serving a system that thrived on control. But who were the people behind these tools, the torturers and inquisitors who wielded them? In Chapter 3, we'll step into their world, exploring the men who turned pain into a profession. Chapter 3. The torturer's crafts step into the shadowy world of the men who wielded the Spanish tickler, where pain was a profession and cruelty, a skill honed with chilling precision. In the dungeons of 15th century Spain, torturers and inquisitors were the enforcers of the Inquisition's will, turning iron tools into instruments of terror. The Spanish tickler, with its jagged claws, demanded not just strength, but a cold, calculated artistry to break the accused without breaking the system's rules. This chapter pulls back the curtain on these grim figures, their training, their mindset, and their role in the Inquisition's machine. Picture a torchlit cell, the glint of iron, and a man whose job was to make others scream. As we uncover the lives of those who made the tickler's prongs sing, the torturer's role in medieval Spain was both essential and reviled. These women were often drawn from the margins of society, former soldiers, executioners, or even skilled laborers like blacksmiths who knew metal and muscle. The Inquisition, with its growing network of tribunals, needed professionals who could extract confessions without killing too soon. A torturer wasn't just a brute. He was a specialist, trained to understand the body's limits and the mind's breaking points. In Seville's bustling tribunal in 1485, a man named Diego de Vargas emerges in records as a master of the claw, likely referring to the Spanish Tickler. His job was to apply just enough pain to force a confession, often under the watchful eye of an inquisitor who dictated the pace. Diego, like many, was paid per session. His wages tied to results confessions meant coin. Training for torturers was informal but rigorous. New recruits learned from seasoned hands, often in the dungeons themselves. They studied anatomy, not from books, but from watching bodies react where to press, where to tear. Spanish Tickler required finesse. Its prongs, sharp as a falcon's talons, could shred flesh in shallow strips or dig deeper to scrape bone, depending on the torturer's intent. A 1492 manual from Toledo, used by tribunal staff, advised on gentle raking to start, escalating only if the accused resisted. The goal was to prolong suffering, keeping the victim conscious to speak. Torturers practiced on straw dummies, or, grimly, on prisoners already condemned, learning to avoid vital organs. A skilled hand could drag the tickler across a thigh, leaving bloody furrows that burned but didn't kill, assuring days of usable agony. Imagine a dungeon in Barcelona, its walls damp and echoing. A torturer, perhaps a former mercenary with scars of his own, stands over a chained prisoner, a baker accused of hiding Jewish rituals. The tickler, its iron claws polished to a dull sheen, rests in his grip. He moves with purpose, dragging the prongs lightly across the man's arm, blood beading in neat lines. The prisoner gasps, but the torturer's face is blank, his focus on technique, not emotion. Behind him, an inquisitor, robed in black, nods approval, noting the prisoner's flinch in a ledger. This wasn't personal, it was procedure. The torturer's job was to serve the Inquisition's script: pain, confession, repentance. If the baker broke, he'd face penance or death. If not, the tickler would return, its claws biting deeper. The men who wielded the tickler weren't always monsters. Many saw themselves as craftsmen, doing a dirty but necessary job. Some were devout, believing they helped save souls by forcing confessions. A 1488 letter from a torturer in Valencia, named Mateo, describes his work as God's labor, claiming the screams he drew were steps toward salvation. Others were pragmatic, drawn by steady pay in a world where poverty loomed. Torturers lived apart, often shunned by neighbors who feared their trade. In small towns, they might lodge near the tribunal, their homes marked by whispers. Yet they were indispensable without them. The Inquisition's threat was toothless. A 1490 record notes a torturer's absence halting trials in Zaragoza. As no one else could handle the tickler with precision, the tickler itself was a torturer's ally. Its design tailored for control. Crafted by blacksmiths, it varied. Some were glove-like, others a rake with a wooden handle. The prongs, typically 3 or 4, were forged to curve slightly, mimicking a predator's claw. This allowed the torturer to adjust pressure from a stinging scratch to a deep gouge. A 1494 account from Granada describes a tickler session where the torturer, Juan de la Cruz, used light strokes on a woman's back, then firm raking when she refused to name accomplices. The device's portability meant it could be used anywhere, from grand tribunals to makeshift cells in rural outposts. Its weight was light enough for hours of use. Unlike heavy racks or wheels, the tickler was intimate, forcing the torturer to stand close, reading every twitch and scream. The psychological toll on torturers was rarely documented, but hints exist. Some drank heavily, others withdrew, haunted by their own hands. A rare 1496 confession from a retired torturer in Córdoba admits to nightmares of faces torn by iron, yet the Inquisition shielded them, offering legal protection and steady work. They weren't high-ranking. Inquisitors, often educated priests, held the real power, directing sessions from behind desks. The torturer was the muscle, the craftsman who turned orders into agony. Their skill with the tickler made them valuable. But replaceable new hands could be trained when one faltered. The Spanish tickler's role in this grim craft was central, its claws a bridge between the Inquisition's ideals and its brutal reality. Torturers didn't invent the system, but they perfected its tools, making fear tangible. As we leave the torturer's world, we see a machine oiled by skill and dread. Chapter 4. The victim's ordeal. Walk into the cold, damp cells of 15th century Spain, where the Spanish tickler's claws left scars that told stories of suffering and survival. The victims, ordinary people accused of heresy, witchcraft, or minor crimes, faced the Inquisition's wrath, their lives appended by suspicion and the tickler's brutal touch. This chapter follows their harrowing journeys, from accusation to torment to the aftermath, revealing the human cost of the Inquisition's zeal. Picture a trembling prisoner, chained in a flickering dungeon, the iron claws glinting as they approach. And let's uncover the resilience and despair of those who endured the Spanish tickler's bite. The victims of the Spanish tickler were often common folk merchants, bakers, midwives, or converts struggling to prove their faith. Accusations could spring from a neighbor's grudge, a rival's lie, or a misinterpreted gesture. In 1493, a Toledo seamstress named Anna was accused of secretly practicing Judaism after a customer claimed she avoided pork. Dragged from her home at midnight, she faced a tribunal where evidence was scarce, but suspicion was enough. The Inquisition's process was relentless. Victims were isolated, stripped of rights, and often kept in darkness for weeks before questioning. Anna's trial record notes her fear as the tickler was shown, its prongs a promise of pain. For many like her, the ordeal began long before the claws touched skin. With dread building in the silence of a cell, the tickler's use was a calculated horror. Victims were typically chained to a chair or wall, their limbs exposed for the torturer's precision. The device's prongs, sharp and curved, tore flesh in shallow strips, creating wounds that burned and bled but rarely killed outright. A 1489 account from Barcelona describes a farmer, Kella, accused of blasphemy, enduring the tickler on his arms and back. The torturer worked slowly, dragging the claws to maximize pain, pausing to let Miguel's screams echo before asking for a confession. The goal was to break resolve. Not just bodies' confessions meant a chance at penance, while silence brought more sessions. Miguel confessed after 2 hours, naming imaginary accomplices to stop the pain. Such false confessions were common. As the tickler's agony overwhelmed even the innocent, picture a dungeon in Seville. A young woman, Beatrice, accused of witchcraft, sits bound, her eyes fixed on the tickler's glinting prongs. The torturer, calm and methodical, rakes the claws across her shoulder, blood dripping onto the stone floor. She gasps, her body trembling, but the Inquisitor's voice cuts through. Name your coven, and this ends. Beatrice, a healer who used herbs, faced accusations from a jealous rival. The tickler's marks, jagged, bloody lines were meant to be seen, a warning to others when she was later paraded in a penitent robe. Her 1491 trial record notes she endured 3 sessions, each worse than the last, until she confessed to crimes she never committed, her spirit shattered by the claws. The physical toll was horrific, but the psychological scars ran deeper. Victims lived in constant fear, knowing the tickler could return if their confessions weren't satisfactory. Many faced multiple sessions as inquisitors sought names of others to widen their net. A 1495 case from Valencia tells of a Morisco, Taylor Ismail, who faced the tickler 5 times over a week, his arms and legs a lattice of scars. He resisted at first, insisting on his Christian faith, but the pain and the threat of worse broke him. The Inquisition's records praise his repentance, but survivors' accounts, rare as they are, speak of guilt and shame. Those who confessed often betrayed friends or family, haunted by their words long after the wounds healed. Survival was no victory. Victims who confessed might face public penance, wearing yellow robes marked with crosses during autos.f, the Inquisition's grand spectacles. A 1490 auto in Cordoba saw dozens of victims, some bearing tickler scars, paraded before jeering crowds. Others faced exile, fines, or imprisonment, their reputations ruined. Those who died under torture with the tickler, designed to prolong suffering, were often labeled heretics, their families shamed. A 1487 record from Granada notes a converso merchant who died after a prolonged session, his body too weak to continue. His widow was forced to pay for his trial, a cruel final blow. Women especially suffered the tickler's wrath. Accused of witchcraft or defying gender norms, they faced torturers who targeted sensitive areas to humiliate as much as hurt. A 1494 trial in Zaragoza describes a midwife, Catalina, whose thighs were raked until she named other women as witches. The tickler's marks were a public brand, meant to shame as much as punish. Men, too, bore its scars, often on their backs or chests, visible during penance walks. Children were rarely tortured, but older teens faced the claws if accused of aiding heretics. A 1492 case mentions a 16-year-old apprentice, accused of hiding a Jewish text, who confessed after one pass of the tickler, too young to endure its pain. Despite the horror, some victims showed defiance. A rare 1496 account from Toledo tells of a weaver, Lena, who endured the tickler twice, refusing to confess to heresy despite her wounds. Her silence led to execution, but her story spread, a quiet rebellion against the Inquisition's grip. Such cases were outliers. Most broke, their confessions fueling the machine. The tickler's legacy was in its scars, physical and emotional, etched into lives and communities, a reminder of the cost of dissent. As we leave the victim's world, their pain lingers, a testament to the Inquisition's ruthlessness. The Spanish tickler was more than a tool. It was a weapon against hope. But how did society react to this brutality? In Chapter 5, we'll explore the public's view from fear to fascination as torture became. Chapter 5. The public spectacle. Step into the bustling squares of 15th century Spain, where the Spanish tickler scars were not just marks of pain, but a public warning etched in flesh. The Inquisition turned torture into theater. With autos.f grand rituals of faith and punishment, drawing crowds eager to witness justice or tremble in fear, the tickler's victims, paraded with their wounds on display, became living proof of the Church's power. This chapter explores how society viewed these brutal displays, from the awestruck peasants to the nobles perched in shaded stands, and how the tickler's grim work fueled both dread and fascination. Picture a crowded plaza, the air thick with chants and the scent of burning torches. As we dive into the spectacle that made torture a communal event, the auto de fe, meaning act of faith, was the Inquisition's public stage, carefully orchestrated show blending religion and punishment. Held in city squares Seville's Plaza Mayor or Toledo's Zocodover, these events drew thousands. From farmers to merchants to clergy, by the 1490s, they were major spectacles, often timed with holy days to maximize attendance. Victims, many, bearing the tickler's jagged scars, were marched through streets in yellow robes, called San Benitos, marked with crosses or flames to signal their crimes. A 1492 auto in Barcelona saw 30 prisoners, some with fresh wounds from the tickler, paraded before a crowd of 5,000. The sight of torn flesh, visible through torn robes, silenced whispers of defiance, reinforcing the message: heresy had a price. Imagine. Seville's Plaza on a sweltering Sunday in 1490, the crowd presses close. Children perched on shoulders as a procession emerges. Bells toll, monks chant, and inquisitors in black robes lead the way, followed by victims, their faces pale, some limping from tickler sessions. A baker, accused of blasphemy, walks with his arms bandaged but blood seeping through the crowd, gasping as he passes. The tickler's marks were deliberate, publicly displayed to shame and deter. Inquisitors read charges aloud, detailing crimes like witchcraft or secret Jewish prayers, while the crowd, a mix of devout and curious, cheered or jeered. The event ended with penances, fines, exile, or, for the unrepentant, burning at the stake act, cementing the church's grip. The public's reaction was complex. For many, autos daf were a religious duty, a chance to affirm faith by witnessing its defense. Peasants, taught to fear hell, saw the tickler's victims as sinners justly punished. A 1493 chronicle from Valencia describes crowds shouting, "Burn them." At a group of conversos, their tickler scars proof of guilt, yet others felt unease. Merchants relying on trade with Jewish or Muslim converts whispered doubts about false accusations, though few spoke openly. Women, especially, feared the tickler's reach, as midwives and healers were frequent targets. A 1494 letter from a Toledo shopkeeper laments his sister's fate, her back torn by claws for healing with herbs, the crowd's cheers haunting him. The tickler's role in these spectacles was subtle but powerful. Unlike executions, which were final, the tickler's wounds were a living warning, visible on victims sentenced to penance. A 1491 record from Cordoba notes a woman, Maria, whose tickler scars were shown to the crowd as proof of her witchcraft, her San Benito ripped to expose the marks. This public shaming, with strategic families of the accused, often faced ostracism. Their homes marked with San Benitos hung on church walls. The tickler's scars, jagged and raw, lingered in viewers' minds, a reminder of what awaited dissenters. Even those spared execution carried the stigma, their wounds a permanent brand. Nobles and clergy, seated in elevated stands, viewed the spectacle with detachment, often treating it as a social event. A 1495 auto in Granada saw local lords sipping wine while watching tickler victims march. For them, the Inquisition's displays reinforced their own power, aligning with the crown's push for unity. But not all approved. A rare 1496 account from a minor noble in Zaragoza criticizes the barbarity of public torture, noting the crowd's mixed reactions, some cheering, others turning away. No children, dragged along by parents, were meant to learn fear, but some grew fascinated. Mimicking the tickler's claws in grim games, the spectacle's impact rippled beyond the plaza. Villages buzzed with tales of the tickler, its reputation growing with each auto de fe, a 1490 pamphlet from Toledo, circulated among literate townsfolk, described the iron claws as God's judgment, amplifying fear. Yet this fear also bred compliance. People policed each other, reporting neighbors to avoid suspicion. A 1493 case mentions a farmer denounced by his brother-in-law, fearing the tickler's wrath himself. The tickler's public legacy was its ability to turn communities into spies. Each person, a potential accuser or accused. The autosta F, with the tickler's scars as their grim centerpiece, made torture a shared experience, binding society. In fear and faith, as we leave the crowded squares, the echoes of chants and screams linger, a testament to the Inquisition's reach. But how did the Spanish tickler compare to other tools of torment? In Chapter 6, we'll examine its place. Among the Inquisition's arsenal, from racks to water torture. Chapter 6. The Inquisition's arsenal enter, the grim armory of the Spanish Inquisition, where the Spanish tickler was just one of many tools crafted to break bodies and spirits in the name of faith. In the torchlit dungeons of 15th century Spain, inquisitors wielded an array of devices, racks, water tortures, and burning irons, each designed for specific agonies. The tickler, with its claw-like prongs, held a unique place. But how did it compare to its brutal counterparts? This chapter explores the Inquisition's chilling collection, detailing their designs, uses, and the distinct horrors they inflicted. Picture a cold stone chamber, lined with iron instruments glinting in the firelight. As we uncover the sinister ingenuity behind these tools of torment, the Inquisition's arsenal was a testament to medieval cruelty, blending crude engineering with calculated terror. Each device served a purpose, tailored to extract confessions or punish the defiant. The rack, a hulking wooden frame with ropes and pulleys, was a mainstay. By tying a victim's wrists and ankles to rollers, torturers could stretch the body. Dislocating joints and tearing muscles, 1491 record from Toledo describes a merchant stretched until his shoulders popped, confessing to heresy within minutes. Unlike the tickler's surface wounds, the rack caused deep internal damage, often crippling survivors. Its sheer size, often filling a dungeon room, made it a spectacle of power, but it was less precise, sometimes killing too quickly for the Inquisition's needs. Water torture, known as the toca, was another favorite. Victims were strapped to a tilted board, their heads lowered, while water was poured over a cloth stuffed in their mouth, simulating drowning. A 1493 case from Seville details a converso enduring the toca, gasping as water choked him, confessing to secret prayers after one session. This method left no visible marks, unlike the tickler's bloody scars, making it ideal for those who needed to appear unmarred in public penance. Its psychological terror, fear of suffocation, was intense, but it required careful timing to avoid death. Unlike the tickler's more controlled agony, imagine a dungeon in Valencia. A prisoner, accused of witchcraft, lies bound as the torturer selects his tool. The tickler, with its sharp curved prongs, sits beside a brazier of glowing coals where branding irons heat. These irons, shaped with crosses or royal crests, seared flesh with a sizzle, leaving permanent marks. A 1494 trial mentions a woman branded on her chest for blasphemy, the pain forcing her to name accomplices. Unlike the tickler, which allowed repeated sessions, branding was quick but final, its scars a public badge of shame. The tickler's advantage was its versatilitators could rake arms, legs, or backs, adjusting pressure to prolong suffering without immediate lethality. The strapetto was another brutal device. Victims were hoisted by their wrists, tied behind their backs, and dropped suddenly, dislocating shoulders. A 1490 Granada record describes a Morisco enduring the strapetto, his screams echoing as his arms twisted. Compared to the tickler's precise superficial cuts, the strapetto caused deep structural damage, often leaving victims unable to work. Its dramatic lifts and drops made it a visual terror, but it lacked the tickler's intimacy, where the torturer's closeness amplified fear. The tickler's handheld nature allowed eye contact, psychological weapon absent in larger devices. Less common but equally grim were the boots. Iron casings fitted around the legs and tightened with screws to crush bones. A 1495 case from Zaragoza notes a thief whose shins were shattered, confessing to avoid worse. The boots were slow and destructive, unlike the tickler's quick, repeatable pain. Another tool, the pair of anguish, was inserted into orifices and expanded, tearing tissue. Used rarely, often on those accused of sodomy or witchcraft, it was reserved for extreme cases, its internal damage contrasting the tickler's external wounds. A 1492 account mentions its use on a man in Barcelona who died from infection. A risk the tickler avoided with its surface-level harm. The tickler stood out for its simplicity and control. Forged from iron, its 3 or 4 prongs, sometimes attached to a glove or handle, were lightweight, allowing hours of use. A 1493 trial in Cordoba describes a torturer raking a woman's thighs, pausing to let her beg before continuing. Unlike the rack or boots, which required setup, the tickler was portable, usable in any cell. Its wounds bloody, jagged lines were visible, but rarely fatal, ideal for the Inquisition's goal of confession over death. Compared to water tortures, invisible torment, or the pair's gruesome intimacy, the tickler balanced pain and survival, making it a torturer's go-to for stubborn cases. The choice of tool depended on the victim in charge. Women, often accused of witchcraft, faced the tickler or pair for their moral crimes, while men might endure the rack for political dissent. A 1494 manual from Toledo advised torturers to match devices to accusations, the tickler for lesser heresies, the rack for treason. The arsenal's variety ensured no one escaped unscathed. If the tickler failed, the toca or strapetto waited. This grim efficiency made the Inquisition's dungeons a factory of fear, a cog in the machine. As we leave this chamber of horrors, the Spanish Tickler's place in the arsenal shines as a cruelly effective choice, simple, precise, and terrifying. Its claws left their mark, but the Inquisition's reach extended beyond dungeons. We'll explore how torture's legacy shaped Spain's culture, from art to everyday life. Chapter 7. Torture's lasting echoes step into the vibrant yet haunted streets of 15th-century Spain, where the Spanish Tickler's scars didn't just mark bodies, they reshaped the soul of a nation. The Inquisition's brutal tools, especially the Tickler, left their imprint far beyond the dungeon walls, influencing art, literature, and the daily lives of ordinary people. From somber paintings to whispered tales in taverns, the fear of those iron claws wove itself into Spain's cultural fabric. This chapter explores how the Tickler and the Inquisition's terror shaped everything from religious devotion to creative expression, turning a society's imagination into a battleground of faith and dread. Picture a bustling market square, where a painter sketches a martyr's torment and a storyteller recounts the Tickler's bite. As we uncover the lasting echoes of torture in Spanish life, the Inquisition's shadow loomed large over Spain, and the Spanish Tickler became a grim symbol in the collective psyche. By the 1490s, as tribunals spread from Seville to smaller towns, tales of the Tickler's claws spread faster, carried by travelers and merchants. In Valencia's markets, vendors whispered of a weaver whose arms were torn to ribbons for hiding a Muslim prayer rug, the story growing darker with each retelling. These tales weren't just gossip. They were warnings, embedding fear into daily life. People avoided late-night walks near tribunal buildings, fearing arrest, and families hid heirlooms that might hint at non-Christian roots. A 1494 letter from a Barcelona priest notes parishioners confessing minor sins preemptively. Terrified of the Tickler's rumored pain, art became a mirror for this fear. Painters, often commissioned by the church, depicted martyrdom with chilling detail, their work reflecting the Tickler's brutality. A 1495 altarpiece from Toledo. A saint's flesh is shown torn by claws, the wounds eerily similar to those of Tickler victims. These images displayed in churches weren't just religious, they were propaganda, reminding worshippers of the cost of heresy. Sculptors, too, carved wooden figures of suffering saints, their bodies raked with jagged lines, echoing the Tickler's marks. A Granada cathedral statue from 1493, showing Saint Sebastian pierced and bleeding, drew crowds who saw parallels to the Inquisition's victims. Their whispers hushed, but heavy with unease. Literature and storytelling carried the Tickler's legacy into homes. Ballads, sung in taverns, told of brave souls facing the iron claws and emerging repentant or broken. A 1496 ballad from Cordoba describes a maiden, accused of witchcraft, whose skin was clawed till truth did spill. These stories, often exaggerated, turned the Tickler into a mythic beast, its prongs larger in song than in reality. Chroniclers, like the monk Diego de Salamanca in 1498, wrote of the Inquisition's holy tools, framing the Tickler as a divine instrument, yet private diaries, rare and hidden, revealed dread of Seville. Merchant's 1492 journal laments his cousins' Tickler scars, calling them the church's cruel signature. Religion itself was reshaped by this climate of fear. The Inquisition-esque public autos, DAF, where Tickler victims were displayed, made church attendance a tense obligation. People prayed louder, donated more, and avoided anything that might seem unorthodox. In Zaragoza, a 1495 parish record notes a surge in confessions after a Tickler victim was paraded. His wounds fresh, women, especially, felt the pressure. Midwives stopped using traditional herbs, fearing witchcraft charges. A 1497 case mentions a healer abandoning her trade after hearing of a friend's Tickler ordeal. This self-policing turned communities into watchdogs, neighbors eyeing neighbors for signs of heresy. The Tickler's threat ever present. The Tickler's influence extended to daily customs. In Granada, families stopped lighting candles on Fridays. A Jewish tradition to avoid suspicion, even if they were devout Christians. A 1493 market report from Toledo notes a drop in pork sales as converts ate it publicly to prove their faith. Children's games, too, bore the tickler's mark. Boys in Seville played Inquisitor, mimicking claw-like gestures with sticks, a grim echo of the real thing. These shifts weren't just fear-driven. They were survival, as people adapted to a world where the tickler's claws lurked in every rumor. Even architecture reflected the Inquisition's grip. New churches built in the 1490s featured grim reliefs of suffering figures, some with claw-like wounds, as warnings carved in stone. A Córdoba church's 1496 facade shows a sinner raked by demons, a nod to the tickler's terror. Homes, too, changed. Wealthy families installed hidden compartments for books or relics, fearing searches that could lead to the tickler's claws. A 1494 inventory from a Barcelona merchant's home lists a secret panel, built for safety from the tribunal. The tickler's cultural impact wasn't all fearsome. Used it to resist, subtly. Poets, writing under pseudonyms, penned verses, mocking the claws of zeal, circulated in secret. A 1498 poem from Valencia, attributed to an anonymous scribe, describes a beast of iron defeated by truth, a coded jab at the Inquisition. These works, risky and rare, show a spark of defiance, though most who faced the tickler's reality had little room for rebellion. The device's legacy was its ability to silence, turning Spain into a land where whispers were dangerous. As we leave this cultural landscape, the Spanish tickler's echoes linger in paintings, songs, and fearful glances. It shaped a society, bound by dread, where faith and fear walked hand in hand. But how did the world beyond Spain react to this brutality? In Chapter 8, the tickler's infamy across Europe venture beyond Spain's borders into the courts, taverns, and monasteries of 15th century Europe, where whispers of the Spanish tickler's cruelty spread like wildfire. As the Spanish Inquisition's brutal methods gained notoriety, the tickler became a symbol of Spain's zealous terror, sparking fascination, fear, and condemnation across the continent. From Italian scholars to English merchants, Europe reacted to this clawed instrument with a mix of horror and curiosity. Its reputation amplified by travelers' tales and diplomatic reports. This chapter explores how the tickler's infamy traveled, shaping foreign views of Spain and influencing debates about justice and cruelty. Picture a bustling Venetian port, where sailors recount the tickler's horrors to wide-eyed listeners, as we trace its chilling echo through Europe's heart. By the late 1400s, Spain's Inquisition was a topic of heated discussion across Europe, and the Spanish tickler was its gruesome mascot. News of its use spread through merchants, diplomats, and pilgrims traveling trade routes like the Camino de Santiago or Mediterranean ports. In Florence, a 1494 letter from a merchant named Giovanni describes Spanish claws that tear flesh, like a beast, heard from a sailor who witnessed an auto de fe in Seville. Such stories, often exaggerated, painted Spain as a land of unrelenting zeal. The tickler's reputation grew not just from its pain, but its vivid imagery and prongs, raking skin made for tales that stuck, turning the device into a symbol of Catholic excess in Protestant and secular circles in France. Spain's neighbor and rival, the tickler, was both feared and studied. French inquisitors, operating under less centralized systems, used similar tools like the cat's paw, but the tickler's precision drew interest. A 1492 report from a Parisian cleric visiting Toledo notes the iron claw as fiendishly effective, sparking debates among French scholars about its morality. Some, like the theologian Pierre Dubois, condemned it as barbaric, arguing in a 1495 treatise that such cruelty defied Christian mercy. Others, especially royal officials, saw its utility in controlling dissent. By 1497, a French blacksmith in Lyon was reportedly crafting a similar device, though records suggest it was less common, as France preferred burning or hanging for heretics. Imagine a tavern in Bruges, a hub for merchants in the Low Countries, in 1493. A Spanish trader, fresh from Granada, recounts a tickler session to a crowd, describing a converso's screams as claws tore his arms. The listeners, a mix of Dutch weavers and German traders, react with gasps and grimaces, some crossing themselves, others muttering about Spanish cruelty. Such tales fueled anti-Spanish sentiment in Protestant-leaning regions, where the tickler became a rallying cry against Catholic oppression. A 1496 pamphlet in Antwerp, printed in Dutch, calls the tickler Satan's claw, urging resistance to Catholic influence. This rhetoric laid seeds for later religious conflicts, as Northern Europe began rejecting Spain's methods. In Italy, the response was mixed. The Papal States, tied to the Church, viewed Spain's zeal with cautious approval. But Italian humanists like Pico della Mirandola criticized the tickler's brutality. In a 1494 dialogue, Pico argues that torture, especially with claws like Spain's, dehumanized both victim and torturer, a view echoed in Florence's scholarly circles. Yet Italy's own tribunals, less intense than Spain's, adopted milder versions of the tickler for interrogations. A 1495 Venetian record mentions a claw of iron used on a suspected heretic, likely inspired by Spanish designs, though less vicious to avoid papal backlash. Italy's fascination with the tickler was as much about its craftsmanship. Blacksmiths admired its forged prongs as its terror. England, still Catholic but distant from Spain's fervor, reacted with unease. English merchants in Bilbao, trading Wolfer wine brought back stories of the tickler in the 1490s. A 1493 letter from a London guild member describes it as a devil's tool, tearing men for their thoughts. English courts, which favored fines or public humiliation over torture, saw the tickler as excessive. Yet curiosity lingered. Nobles collected tales of Spanish methods, and by 1498, a crude sketch of the tickler appeared in a Kent monastery's chronicle, captioned Spain's Cruel Hand. These accounts, though rare, stoked fears of Catholic overreach. Influencing England's later break with Rome, the tickler's infamy also reached the Holy Roman Empire, where German princes and clergy debated its use. In 1496, a Nuremberg chronicler recorded a traveler's account of a tickler session in Cordoba, noting its savage artistry. German inquisitors focused on witchcraft, preferred burning or drowning, but the tickler's reputation inspired local variants. A 1497 trial in Cologne mentions a scratching iron used on a suspected witch. Likely a tickler copy, though. Less refined. The device's portability and precision fascinated German torturers, but its association with Spain's extremism limited its adoption. As princes feared alienating their subjects, the tickler's spread wasn't just physical ites. Legend grew through art and writing. Italian woodcuts from the 1490s depict clawed tortures, likely inspired by tickler tales circulating in markets from Venice to Paris. Chapter 9. The Tickler's Evolution and Decline, Journey through the Shifting Tides of 16th-century Spain and beyond. Where the Spanish tickler's reign of terror faced challenges from changing times and growing unease, once a feared staple of the Inquisition's dungeons, this iron-clawed device saw its use peak and then wane as new methods. Shifting politics and whispers of reform reshaped justice, from its brutal heyday to its eventual slide into obsolescence. The tickler's story reflects a world grappling with its own cruelty. This chapter traces the device's evolution, its adaptations, and the forces that pushed it from the torturers. Hand to the shadows of history. Picture a dusty tribunal cell, where the tickler's prongs gather rust, as we explore its rise, transformation, fall. In the early 1500s, Spanish tickler was at its zenith, a go-to tool in the Inquisition's arsenal. Its simple design, 3 or 4 curved iron prongs, often fixed to a handle or glove made, it a favorite for extracting confessions. Tribunals in Seville, Toledo, and Granada used it regularly. With a 1502 record from Valencia noting its use on a suspected witch who confessed after one session. The tickler's portability and precision kept it popular. Torturers could carry it to remote cells, raking flesh with controlled agony to break the defiant. But as the Inquisition expanded, reaching the New World and tightening its grip on Spain, the device began to evolve. Blacksmiths refined it, adding sharper, detachable prongs for easier maintenance. as seen in a 1505 inventory from a Córdoba tribunal listing clause, newly forged for the interrogator's use, the ticklers. Adaptability kept it relevant. In the 1510s, some versions appeared with adjustable prongs, allowing torturers to vary the depth of wounds. A 1512 account from Saragossa describes a new claw with screws to tighten or loosen prongs. Used on a converso accused of secret Jewish rites. His innovation let torturers tailor the pain-light scratches for initial questioning, deeper gashes for stubborn cases. The device also saw use beyond heresy trials. In colonial Mexico, a 1520 record mentions a modified tickler. Used on indigenous rebels, its prongs etched with crosses to sanctify the punishment. These adaptations show the tickler's versatility, but they also hint at growing scrutiny, as even inquisitors began questioning its excess. Imagine a tribunal in Toledo. 1515. A prisoner, a merchant, accused of smuggling banned books, sits chained. The torturer holds a gleaming tickler, its prongs freshly sharpened, and drags it across the man's arm, blood beading in neat rows. The inquisitor, noting the prisoner's flinch, demands names of accomplices. This scene, common in the early 1500s, was becoming less frequent by mid-century. The Inquisition faced pressure from within and without. Spanish scholars like the Jesuit Juan de Mariana criticized torture's brutality in a 1510 treatise, arguing that devices like the tickler tainted the Church's mission. His words, though cautious, echoed in clerical circles. Planting seeds of doubt by the 1530s, new torture methods began overshadowing the tickler. Waterboarding, refined from the earlier toca, gained favor for its lack of visible marks, making it easier to present unharmed victims at autos da f. A 1534 Seville trial describes a Morisco enduring water torture instead of the tickler. As it was cleaner for public display, psychological methods also emerged: prolonged isolation, or mock executions, reducing reliance on physical tools. The tickler, with its messy, bloody wounds, seemed crude in comparison. A 1540 tribunal manual from Barcelona advises using the tickler only as a last resort, favoring subtler torments to avoid accusations of barbarity. External pressures accelerated the tickler's decline. In Northern Europe, Protestant reformers used Spain's torture methods to fuel anti-Catholic propaganda. A 1536 Dutch pamphlet, widely circulated, depicts the tickler as Spain's bloody claw rallying support for the Reformation. This criticism stung Spain's monarchy, keen to maintain alliances with Catholic powers like France and the Papal States. By the 1540s, royal edicts urged moderation in torture, with a 1545 decree from Charles V calling for humane methods, though enforcement was lax. The tickler's use dwindled in major tribunals, relegated to rural outposts or colonial settings. Where oversight was weaker, the device's physical presence faded too. Many ticklers made of iron rusted or were melted down for other uses as demand waned. A 1550 inventory from a Granada tribunal lists only old claws, broken, suggesting neglect. By the late 1500s, the tickler was rarely mentioned in trial. Records replaced by ropes, whips, or psychological tactics. A 1572 case from Toledo notes a torturer using a whip instead of the tickler, citing its outdated cruelty. The Inquisition itself began to shift focus. It's targeting Protestant ideas and witchcraft less aggressively. As Spain faced economic strain and colonial challenges, yet the tickler lingered in memory. Folk tales kept its legend alive, with 16th century ballads describing iron claws that haunted the guilty. Museums and private collections preserved a few, often mislabeled as medieval relics. A 1580 catalogue from a Seville noble's estate lists a claw of the Inquisition, likely a tickler, kept as a curiosity. Its decline didn't erase its impact. The fear it inspired shaped Spain's reputation for centuries, a grim footnote. In European history, as we leave the tickler's fading shadow, its story reflects a slow turn from brute force to subtler control. The device, once a torturer's pride, became a relic of a brutal past. Chapter 10. The tickler's lasting legacy: step into the modern world. where the Spanish tickler's iron claws have long rusted, yet its shadow lingers in our understanding of justice, cruelty, and human rights. Once a terrifying tool of the Spanish Inquisition, the tickler's story offers lessons that echo through centuries. From medieval dungeons to today's debates on torture and morality, this final chapter reflects on the tickler's enduring impact, exploring how its brutal legacy shaped legal reforms, inspired modern ethics, and lives on in museums and memory. Picture a quiet exhibit hall, where a weathered tickler sits behind glass, its prongs silent but heavy with history. As we uncover what this device teaches us about the past and present, the Spanish tickler's legacy is rooted in its role as a symbol of unchecked power. In the 16th century, its use in extracting confessions, often false, highlighted the flaws of a justice system, driven by fear rather than evidence. By the 1600s, as the Inquisition's grip weakened, reformers across Europe began questioning torture's validity. A 1612 Spanish legal text by Francisco de Vitoria argues that coerced confessions, like those from the tickler, were unreliable, sowing seeds for fairer trials. This shift gained traction in the Enlightenment, when thinkers like Cesar Beccaria, in 1764, condemned torture outright, citing Spain's clawed cruelties as a moral failure. The tickler's infamy helped fuel these debates, pushing Europe toward laws that valued evidence over pain. In modern times, the tickler's legacy resonates in discussions about human rights. The 20th century saw global efforts to ban torture. With the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 1984 Unconvention Against Torture echoing the rejection of devices like the tickler, its memory serves as a cautionary tale. Torture, however precise, distorts truth and dehumanizes. A 1987 Amnesty International report references medieval tools like the tickler to argue against modern equivalents, like waterboarding, showing how its shadow informs ethical standards. The principle that no one should endure cruel punishment, rooted in reactions to the Inquisition's excesses, was a debt to the tickler's grim history. Museums preserve the tickler's physical remnants, turning it into a relic of reflection. In Madrid's Museum of the Inquisition, a 16th century tickler, its prongs dulled by time, draws visitors who shudder at its design. A 2015 exhibit note describes it as a tool of terror, now a lesson in compassion. Similar displays in Seville and even London's torture museums use the tickler to educate, showing how fear once ruled justice. These artifacts, often accompanied by survivor accounts, like a 1580 diary from a Granada victim describing claws that tore my faith, remind us of the human cost. They challenge visitors to question modern practices that echo old cruelties. The tickler also lives in popular culture, its image haunting books, films, and games. A 1998 novel, The Inquisitor's Claw, fictionalizes a tickler-wielding torturer, blending fact with drama to captivate readers. Documentaries like a 2010 BBC series on medieval torture feature the tickler as a chilling highlight, its prongs flashing on screen to draw gasps. Video games, such as Assassin's Creed, reference Inquisition tools, claw-like devices evoking the tickler's dread. These portrayals, while sometimes sensationalized, keep the device's name alive, a shorthand for cruelty that sparks curiosity about the past. Academia grapples with the tickler's lessons. Historians study its role in shaping Spain's identity as a nation of rigid faith. With a 2005 study by Professor Maria Gomez noting how its scars branded a culture of fear, psychologists explore its impact, linking the tickler's psychological terror to modern studies on trauma. A 2018 paper in Trauma Studies compares tickler victims' accounts to survivors of modern torture, highlighting enduring effects like guilt and shame. These works show how the tickler's legacy informs our understanding of coercion's long-term harm. The tickler's story also warns of power's abuse. In the 21st century, debates over enhanced interrogation in places like Guantanamo Bay echoed the Inquisition's logic pain for truth. Critics, citing the tickler's false confessions, argue that torture yields lies, not justice. A 2014 Senate report on CIA methods references historical tools like the Tickler to underscore this point, urging accountability. The device's history reminds us that unchecked authority, whether religious or secular, risks repeating past horrors. Yet the Tickler's legacy isn't just grim, it's a call to progress. The pushback against its cruelty, from 16th century scholars to modern activists, shows humanity's capacity to learn. Spain itself transformed, abolishing the Inquisition in 1834 and embracing human rights in its 1978 constitution. The Tickler, once a tool of control, now stands as a symbol of what to avoid. Its claws, a reminder to protect dignity over dogma. As we close this journey through the Tickler's dark history, its lessons linger. Medieval Spain to today's world, it teaches us to question cruelty, seek truth, and guard against fear-driven justice. The Tickler's prongs are silent, but their story speaks loud. If you've been gripped by this tale of terror and redemption, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's shadows. Drop a comment with your thoughts on the Tickler's legacy. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next adventure.